Today, IFCR is hosting a webinar with Nate Plasman. Nate Plasman is a Duchenne Muscular Dystrophy parent. His son is diagnosed with Duchenne Muscular Dystrophy. He's become an advocate. He's a devoted husband to his wife of 20 years, Sarah, and a proud father of 3. In 2016, at the age of 2, Nate's son, Andrew, was diagnosed with Duchenne's muscular dystrophy, which causes muscles to get weaker over time. 9 months later, Andrew was chosen for a clinical trial and would either receive gene therapy during week 1 or week 49 of the study. Within just a few weeks of participating in the study, the Plasman family saw improvements. Now Nate has embraced the opportunity to share his family's story and the tremendous urgency to ensure that policy continues to advance along with rapidly progressing science. So Nate, welcome I guess this afternoon now, and we are really happy to have you with us as we are a rare disease community that is approaching the beginning of some potential clinical trials in gene therapy. So thank you for joining us. And I'm going to apologize for how my earbuds look funny, but if I don't use these little great things that attach on my earbuds, Samantha knocks them out of my ears and they go everywhere. So that's the explanation. So thanks for joining us, Nate, and we look forward to hearing your story and you sharing with us.
You're welcome, Karen. It's an honor and a privilege to be invited into a intimate rare disease community that you so faithfully lead. Being in Philly was great. It was anticlimactic, but I'm really excited to be here today. So I am in Chicagoland, about 15 miles straight west of downtown Chicago, and we're talking weather. It's 74 degrees here compared to 110 in other places. So it's comfortable. But as Karen mentioned, I'm a proud dad, proud husband. We have 3 kids. Grace is our oldest. She is 17. She's going to be a senior in high school. Son Jackson is 14. He'll be a freshman in high school. And then Andrew just turned 12, and he will be entering grade 6 next month. And, I grew up with 3 sisters. I never envisioned having multiple boys or sons. Interestingly, my wife's family is also 3 girls and a boy, like my family is 3 girls and a boy. So when we found out we were going to have 2 boys, it was surreal. I was in like total shock. And, I kind of figured, since I was pretty athletic as a kid, like my boys would play baseball and soccer and basketball, and they'd win multiple state championships and maybe even get drafted professionally in a couple of sports. Like, sports was such a centric part of my life as a kid and even now as an adult. And after Andrew was born in 2014, we just kind of noticed, actually my wife Sarah noticed, that he was sort of floppy. So, car seats, you have to kind of like place your child into a car seat with the technology they have these days. And when we would place Andrew into the car seat, he was just kind of floppy. He didn't have a lot of neck strength. And when he was like 16, 18 months old, he'd always kind of look up to me because he was uneasy on his feet, and he'd say, "Daddy, hold you, hold you." So he wanted me to like offer a finger or a couple fingers for him to hold because he was just not very confident on his feet. So my wife's kind of a worrier, and she is type A to the max. So she would put the 3 kids to bed. We would put the 3 kids to bed, and then she'd go on the internet and she would look stuff up. And because of her grit and determination and advocacy for Andrew, at Andrew's 2-year checkup on July 1st, 2016, it was a new pediatrician because our previous pediatrician was on maternity leave, and this new pediatrician was, quite a bit older, more experienced, and she heard Sarah's concern, and she said, "Hey, let's put all your fear and concern to rest or to bed and just do a basic blood test." So, 2-year checkup, the blood test the next day. It was like 1 o'clock in the afternoon. We get a phone call from the pediatrician, and because Sarah had done all the due diligence, when the pediatrician said, unfortunately, Andrew's CK test, creatine kinase, came back at 24,000, my wife knew exactly what it meant. And the pediatrician said, I encourage you guys to schedule an appointment ASAP at Lurie Children's Hospital in downtown Chicago with a pediatric neurologist. So, yeah, that day, I still get kind of choked up talking about it because it was like everything changed, but nothing changed in that moment with one little phone call. And for 10 days, for 2 weeks, we thought our son Jackson maybe had Duchenne muscular dystrophy as well. He was 4 years old at the time, and he had played in a Park District soccer league, and he was very disinterested. And when he was a baby, he had elevated liver enzymes. Come to find out, it was just an infection. But yeah, for 2 weeks, we thought, oh my goodness, holy cow, both of our boys have a fatal genetic disorder called Duchenne muscular dystrophy. Fortunately, Jackson's test came back normal. But following getting those results, yeah, it was kind of a silver lining to only have one child that we had to really fight for and advocate for. But Sarah really had a hard time accepting the diagnosis and really struggled with her mental, spiritual, psychological well-being. Had a couple panic attacks. Really bemoaned the fact she was angry at God, and she said, "This isn't fair. We don't deserve this." And I think that a lot of families who get heavy diagnoses battle that same war, if you will. And,
I would agree, Nate.
certain parents respond one way. Maybe a husband does something, the wife does the other thing. So it was a real discombobulating experience, I would say, that third quarter of 2016, fourth quarter of 2016. And then in 2017, Sarah got a lot healthier mentally and spiritually, psychologically, and we just committed to advocating and learning as much about muscular dystrophy and the science and making connections with people in the community. So then in 2018, I was invited to speak at an event in Washington, D.C. It was called a patient focused compass meeting. So the federal bureaucracy recognized, I think, because of all the parent led patient advocacy groups, that they were really bad at listening. I think they pretty openly admit that. I don't want to criticize, but yeah, they're bureaucratic and they think they have all the answers. And they had a light bulb go off that said, we really need to invite the patient perspective into rare diseases and clinical trials. So the patient focused compass meeting was in Washington, D.C. I was asked to speak on a panel with three other moms. Got real emotional talking about my precious boy, Andrew. And then after I spoke, the founder of Parent Project Muscular Dystrophy, a woman named Pat Furlong, who should win a Nobel Prize, in my humble opinion, she pulled me aside and she told me about the clinical trial happening in Columbus, Ohio at Nationwide Children's Hospital, involving a commercial company called Sarepta. And she said, Nate, Andrew would be the ideal candidate. You had to be 4 years old to participate. You had to have a certain mutation. So we reached out to the clinical team there probably 50 or 100 times and didn't really get anywhere because they were inundated with people from all over the world trying to get into this clinical trial. And Dr. Mendel, the PI, he was in his upper 70s at the time. So this was kind of like the capstone of his career because he has been an advocate and an amazing researcher and clinician for boys dealing with Duchenne muscular dystrophy and children battling spinal muscle atrophy. So he was pretty particular about who he wanted to participate in the trial because he didn't want, these crazy parents that weren't going to show up for follow-up appointments, or they're going to post everything on the internet and turn into a real chaotic situation if he chose the wrong family. So after reaching out to him a bunch of times, getting nowhere, I worked for a family-owned trucking company, and my father-in-law, Jack, my boss, Andrew's grandpa, we were out for lunch with our biggest customer at the time, a company called United Pool out of suburban Columbus, Ohio. And we're out at this little strip mall Italian restaurant, like a mile from our terminal here in Addison, Illinois. And I looked at the president of the company. His name was Lloyd Sprocket. And I said, Lloyd, what do you know about Nationwide Children's Hospital? And he kind of like turned his head and he looked at me and he's like, why the heck do you care about Nationwide Children's Hospital? I said, well, Lloyd, I have a son named Andrew that has Duchenne Muscular Dystrophy, and we're desperate to get into this clinical trial in Columbus, Ohio at Nationwide Children's. He's like, huh, interesting. I never thought this topic would come up at lunch today. And he said, I'm not going to promise you anything, but my boss, the founder and CEO of United Pool, is a very philanthropic fella who knows a lot of people in Columbus. And I'll mention your story to him. And I think he'll probably reach out on your behalf to the hospital. So 2 days later, we got a phone call from Dr. Mendel's office inviting us to go to Columbus and participate in the initial screening process for the gene therapy clinical trial. And I'm not here to brag or boast, but rather, I think the important takeaway is you have to really fight like hell and share your story with people and get those atoms out into the universe so that the chemical reactions can happen so that things will hopefully go as best as they can for your child. And that situation with Lloyd Sprocket was a great example of, sure, was I nervous and anxious about opening my mouth at a business lunch about my son? Heck yeah, I was. I mean, I got a little choked up, then Lloyd got choked up, but you have to take some risk. And nothing's going to change if you don't take thoughtful, intentional, calculated maybe isn't the right word, but like prudent decisions and take risk because yeah, when you're dealing with an undefeated, progressive, rare genetic disorder, you gotta be bold and assert yourself and step into scary situations.
And advocacy comes in all different kinds of forms, right? Like
It
what's
does.
advocacy in one situation is one thing, and what it is in another is something else. But I think you make a great point with talking about the importance of sharing your story because sometimes you don't ever know what connection's going to build from that.
Hmm. Amen. Yeah, and central to our family and in the way that my wife and I were raised, in the way that we're trying to raise our kids, is a very open, ready acknowledgement that Andrew belongs to his creator. I am merely his earthly dad. My wife is his earthly mom, but he belongs to God. And I don't own him. I've just been entrusted by God to steward his life the best that I can. And I'm a pretty derelict guy most days, Karen, and I make a lot of mistakes and I screw up, but uh, I really take seriously the responsibility of fighting for Andrew and sharing his story. Um, and I think it's also important to note that even in the dynamics between me and my wife, we're going to celebrate our 22nd anniversary next month. We're very different people, but we're rowing in the same direction with the same purpose. And I'm more of the charismatic, out there, crazy dad, and she provides the stability and daily discipline for our kids. So we went through a season where I would get really frustrated with Sarah that she wasn't doing the same things I was doing and reaching out to people and advocating and bawling my eyes out to pretty much any Tom, Dick, or Harry or Jane or June. And she said, Nate, we gotta also provide our kids some stability so that sure, you keep doing what you're doing, but I'm not going to be the same person that you are. And we had to accept that in our marriage and in our relationship that we were gifted in different ways, but both of us were doing our best to advocate for Andrew and for our other two kids and to create a unified, stable, domestic family.
Yeah, that's great. And I think so many families deal with that because everyone deals with their grief of a diagnosis
Mm,
differently, right? I
for
think you
sure.
pointing out that you're two different people, it doesn't necessarily mean you have different goals, but the strengths or ways you have to help meet those goals may be different than your spouse's, and
Hmm.
figuring out how to communicate that to one another and also become okay that
Hmm.
someone is different than you are is
Hmm.
that's that's great that you were able to reach that. So once you found out about the trial, then were you both on the same page? Like, was that an easy thing to be on the same page of what you wanted to do? Or was there a time where there were discussions around that in the decision-making process?
We were pretty much on the same page right from the get-go, because it really felt like we were on the threshold of this new era for boys and families dealing with Duchenne muscular dystrophy. So I just turned 47 last week. Um, and if I had been diagnosed back in 1979 or 1980, my mom and dad would have been told, you're screwed or effed. I told you I'd keep it PG. Uh, but there's nothing we can do for your child. Take him home, love him, but he's going to lose the ability to walk probably between the ages of 8 to 10. And you're going to return him to the ground when he's 16, if you're lucky. And that was a very, very sobering reality for a lot of years. But fortunately, there are people like Pat Furlong that didn't accept that, and they fought and they advocated and they raised money and they collaborated with commercial sponsors and pharma in the industry. So, like in September of 2016, Sarepta Therapeutics got FDA approval for an exon skipping technology, which is kind of like it's like a cousin of gene therapy. It's just not quite as robust. But exon skipping is very beneficial, or marginally beneficial. And it really provided Sarepta with a lot of momentum to get that FDA approval for that. So we had met a lot of people like Pat and other families, other dads, other young men dealing with Duchenne. And we knew based on the natural history what Andrew's life would probably look like if we didn't do anything. So it's all kind of like a risk benefit analysis. And given the grim prognosis or natural history, I think we were really, really keen on pursuing anything that came our way, and we were quite a bit more bold or open to risk than we normally function in our everyday lives. Like we're both relatively conservative individuals, and we live in suburban Chicago, and it's like just kind of a path that we're on. But when you get a diagnosis like that and the rug gets pulled out from underneath you, it kind of forces you to reevaluate things and to put on a different set of lenses as it pertains to risk benefit analysis. Not to say that like we're trying and doing everything all the time, but we were really confident that based on Pat's recommendation and Dr. Mendel's I think he retired at 84 years old back 2 years ago. So he had practiced medicine in his career 54 years, and he's a PhD and he's an MD. And his bedside manner and his sincerity and authenticity really, really resonated with us when we first met him in April of 2018. So that was a really long and all over the place response to your question, and I haven't finished quite yet. But so we go to Columbus, Ohio, 2018, and Andrew had to be 4 years old to participate in the trial, and he was born July 1st, 2016, 2014 rather. So we thought to ourselves, okay, it's the middle of April. We got to wait through May. We got to wait through June. And then once he turns 4 years old on July 1st, 2018, we'll hopefully get a call from Sarepta and or from Nationwide Children's Hospital. He's been selected. You need to come to Columbus and do a titer test and all the other 3 or 4 days of required appointments. It didn't happen, and it didn't come until November of 2018. So I think the other really important point I want to make about clinical trial participation is it doesn't always go according to the calendar that you expected to or wanted to. And it can be a really agonizing waiting period because you're super optimistic, you're super hopeful, you feel really blessed that you've been kind of selected or included in this dialogue. But there's a lot of waiting, and it never happens quite as fast as you want it to. Um, but you still got to stay in the game, and you still reach out. The folks at Nationwide Children's Hospital were incredible. I mean, there's probably 7 or 8 people from that clinical trial experience that get Christmas cards from us because you spend a lot of time with those people throughout that clinical trial process, and they almost kind of become like surrogate aunts and uncles to your family or to your children. So I think that's also really important through the whole process, the stress, the waiting, the uncertainty. They're human beings and they also have families. And as frustrated or as difficult as the situation might feel for your immediate family, they too are dealing with having to give, bad news or less than ideal updates. So we always tried to like look at it as an opportunity to connect with people, never forgetting like ultimately what we wanted for Andrew to participate in the trial and get gene therapy. But I think it's super important to recognize and acknowledge and treat people the way you would want to be treated because it's a high stress environment, Karen. You get this bad news and then you're in a new place. You don't really know anyone, but they're human beings just like you or I, and they have families and they're just doing the best that they can. Because there's a lot of animosity and strong rhetoric I see sometimes with rare patient communities and blaming other people, and we just try to refrain from doing that. And I think that in the long run, people come to appreciate that about our family and about our kids, and it benefits you. It's like it's the golden rule: do unto others as you would have them do unto you. So, all right, Andrew finally gets selected to participate. That was in November, late November 2018. He was in preschool at the time. And then in December of 2019, he had to have another titer test to make sure his antibody levels weren't too elevated. His weight was good. His deletion was the right one. So we were in Columbus for 4 days, and then we found out that we would have to spend 30 days at Nationwide Children's Hospital from like January 10 until February 10. And the commercial company, Sarepta, was very generous and put us up in a furnished apartment and paid for all of our meals and our flights and whatnot. But it was a really interesting time when Andrew was dosed. We knew he was either going to get it at week 1 or at week 49. And I was there for the dosing. And, Andrew was like 4.5 years old, and he was totally oblivious to the magnitude of what was happening in that room. You're on the or in the intensive care unit of a specialty pediatric hospital in a big city. So there was a lot of, families around us in other rooms that were dealing with a lot of heartache and really tough situations. But when Andrew was dosed at 1 o'clock in the afternoon, that January day in 2019, it was kind of like a celebration, like this joyous occasion. I mean, Dr. Mendel was very focused and he was very businesslike, but little Andrew had no idea like what was really happening and the magnitude of it. So I was there for that, and then I went back home to Chicago after a few days after Sarah and Andrew settled into the apartment, and my wife would call me, and she'd do it on FaceTime, and she'd show me videos of him doing things that he never was able to do before, or she'd call me and kind of whisper and say, "You're never going to believe what Andrew just did." So that was really exciting. Keep in mind, in Chicagoland, we were dealing with a polar vortex, and it was like 27 below zero, and the kids didn't have school for a whole week. So fortunately, Grace and Jackson were able to stay with my in-laws for that whole month. But it was like kind of touch and go there for a little while because of how cold it was, and we lost power at the family business for 3.5, almost 4 days. And Sarah would call me and she'd say, "Why are you so stressed out?" I'd say, "Honey, because I am, like, this solo parenting thing and how cold it is." And she was really enjoying her time with Andrew and seeing this transformational change in him. And we don't like to speculate, but after seeing those videos, I was really, really confident that we had made the right decision and that Andrew had received the real gene therapy at week 1. So then we had probably, I think, 12 or 13, maybe 14 follow-up visits after that month-long stay. And then week 49, we had to go back to Columbus for 30 days. And the kids, fortunately, were on Christmas vacation. So we celebrated 10 days of Christmas in a pretty cool little urban apartment in downtown Columbus. And I think that's the other piece. Like, sure, could Sarah and I bemoan Andrew's diagnosis? Definitely. There are days and moments or weeks or months that we do, but we try to make it as joyous as possible because he's not our only child. We have two other kids. So, a lot of stops at the Lego store or special meals. I mean, the kids kind of got spoiled when we were in Columbus for 10 days together. So, very positive memories of that. Um, yeah, and now here we are, almost 7 years post dose, and we knew that gene therapy wasn't a cure. Cure is a big word. It's a very big word. We knew that gene therapy was attempting to arrest disease progression. So we went into it open-minded. We had to explain to both sets of our parents that, hey, this is not a cure. Like, it's still going to manifest itself, but hopefully it'll be an arrested manifestation of Duchenne muscular dystrophy. And that's really kind of been our experience thus far. The durability and the efficacy start to wear off after a little while. But we've had 7 great years where Andrew functions like a relatively normal 12-year-old boy. Now, granted, he's super coordinated, but he hasn't participated in Little League baseball or soccer. But he loves to collect sports cards and memorabilia like his dad. Uh, and he has minimal accommodations at school. He's a stubborn, gritty, determined guy. He's very concerned about looking drippy, like he's got to have the latest, greatest clothing. And I think he spends more time in the bathroom getting ready than his two other siblings combined. Likes to wear cologne. He's got a girlfriend
That's
who lives a
awesome.
couple blocks down the street from us. So I share all those intimate details just to try to articulate or demonstrate that I think he's a pretty happy kid who's leading a really good life. And that wasn't always the case for boys and young men with Duchenne muscular dystrophy.
Right. So Nate, I want to ask a question. So when you went in for the treatment, right?
Mhm.
There was a potential that that was going to be a sham procedure, right? That first, am I
Yeah,
right? So some
yeah,
kids did
amen.
receive a sham
Saline
procedure,
solution.
right?
Saline solution.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. So, and yeah, just to clarify to the listeners, in case you don't know what a sham procedure is, it is going through the same treatment so that the parents and the treating clinician can't tell who got a treatment and who didn't.
Yeah.
And there's potential for that to still be required of any disease modifying treatment in a clinical trial for our community. And like you said, going in and not knowing whether you're going to receive that at week 1 or week 49. And I think in your case, it obviously became clear early. And that may be, if we move forward with the gene therapy, that could be the same in our situation, right? That suddenly your child is gaining skills that they haven't gained before. Um, but what about for his particular type of therapy, was there any immunotherapy ahead of time? Did they tamper the immune system? Was there any of that your family had to deal with and go through?
There was. So Andrew has been on steroids since his diagnosis. He's on a weekend dose. So Saturdays and Sundays, he's administered an oral steroid. It used to be like a syrup. Now it's a pill today. But they really ramped that up significantly in the like 2 weeks leading up to dosing. And then for like 4 weeks after dosing, he was on a mega dose of steroids. And the other thing about clinical trial participation is when we agreed to have Andrew participate, it was like a 27-page document that Sarah and I had to sign. But it went through a lot of iterations because it's like real life science and like real life clinical trial. And it's all a big math and science problem, figuring out the calculus, figuring out the dosing levels. So it went through, I think we've probably had 15 different consent documents we've had to sign over the years. Because as the scientific process develops and unfolds and data is gathered, they learn from it. Um, So I think and for example, Andrew was the seventh boy in the world to receive Elevidys, which is the commercial name for Sarepta's gene therapy. Elevidys is elevated dystrophin. So when you have Duchenne muscular dystrophin, there's a genetic duplication, out of frame mutation, or a deletion. So his body didn't produce any dystrophin. So there are multiple forms of muscular dystrophy. Duchenne is the most severe or the most intense, and it produces the least amount of dystrophin. So you could have Becker muscular dystrophy or limb-girdle muscular dystrophy. And I think it's important to note that Duchenne is the most intense, and the least amount of dystrophin is produced with Duchenne. So, any marginal improvement in producing dystrophin, because dystrophin is the largest gene in the human body, and it's a protein, and it serves as like a shock absorber for muscle. So if you don't produce dystrophin over time, your muscles fibrose or they harden. And yeah, it's cruel because your heart's a muscle, your diaphragm is a muscle, and yeah, we're really fortunate that the protocol was as forward thinking and thoughtful and thorough as it was, but it changed over time. So, Andrew's seventh boy in the world to get dosed, we had to be there for 30 days. At one of his follow up appointments last summer, we walk into the clinical trial site, Nationwide Children's Hospital, the rare disease or the gene therapy floor of the hospital. And two doors down from Andrew's patient room, a family's being administered gene therapy, like right in front of us. And it was the physician and a nurse practitioner, mom and dad, the patient. When Andrew was administered it in 2019, there were like 17 people in the room, and we were in the intensive care unit of the hospital. So the point I'm trying to make is, as data is gathered and experiences are experienced, and the physicians or the clinicians get readouts, they learn from it. So it's a work in progress, really. I mean, it's like the epitome of the scientific process.
So, mentioning you're still having follow-ups, right? Can you talk a
Mhm.
little bit about the long-term commitment and then the importance of making sure if you take a spot in a trial like this, that you carry through, that you keep those appointments so that you don't drop out and harm that clinical trial.
Yeah, it's super important, um, because our hope and prayer is that Andrew will be in clinical trials for the rest of his earthly days. We know the natural history of what happens for individuals with Duchenne muscular dystrophy. So we put a lot of hope in having him continue to participate in clinical trials because the human body is amazing. The human genome is just fascinating, and they're learning more and more about it every single day, every single week, every single month, every single year. And, if you think about like HIV or AIDS, super complicated, awful, awful condition. I don't know. Have they said they've cured it? Like the word cure, I have
No.
yet to see that or hear that. But have they arrested the progression of the disease? Absolutely. I mean, Magic Johnson, he was one of my heroes growing up. And I'll never forget where I was. I was in fifth grade in Granville, Michigan, when I found out he was HIV positive. And I thought to myself, oh my goodness, this guy, my hero, Michigan State graduate, LA Laker, he's going to die in a couple of years. Well, that was 1991. That's a long time ago. And
It
I
is.
think the same is true for a lot of these complicated genetic disorders and diseases. It's going to be a cocktail approach because they're so complicated and they manifest themselves very differently in each individual. They might have the same deletion or duplication, but because of the individual's DNA, his body responds differently than his contemporary that might look and be the exact same, quote unquote. So we're super optimistic that science and pharma are going to continue to push the envelope and keep allowing families like ours to participate in clinical trials. It's noteworthy or significant. Elevidys is $3.2 million dollars. It's, I think, the second most expensive drug in the country. Um, but if you do the marginal analysis and you look at a boy that doesn't get Elevidys and the costs associated with his care and disease progression, I mean, these executives are smart guys. They have advanced degrees. Sure. Do they want to make money? Absolutely. Have they invested billions of dollars into it already? No doubt. So I am thankful for our commercial companies, both here in the US and around the world, that are doing the work that they're doing. And I try to stay in contact with some of the executives or personnel from those companies that I've met because, like the clinical team at Nationwide, they're human beings and they're not out to get you or to take advantage of your situation. They want to help you. And when you send them a little picture, like this is Andrew's picture from a school publication that just hit our mailbox. And look at him. He looks like a freaking happy, joyful fifth grade
Okay,
boy.
lower it just a little. There you
Okay, how
go.
about right there?
That's perfect.
Yeah, I mean,
Perfect.
you would have no idea
Yeah.
battling Duchenne muscular dystrophy. So I sent that to some of the people at Sarepta and at Nationwide, and it fills them with so
It
much joy.
motivates them. Yeah,
It
it
does. It
motivates
does.
them. We did at our conference this summer, a lot of the pharmaceutical companies, their patient advocates, and even some of their corporate leaders were there. And it
Yep.
means a lot to them to hear our stories and to learn from us. So that is part of why sharing what you're going through is so important. And I think you made another really important point about um, in Duchenne, there's several different precision medicine type treatments now. And that's the case for a lot of these genetic disorders, like you said, because of different types of mutations or different areas of the gene that
Mhm.
need something different, right?
Yep.
And
Yep.
it doesn't always eliminate the need for the symptomatic treatment in
Mhm.
addition to, right? So
Yes.
that's one of the things I think is important in setting expectations sometimes. And like you said, these are clinical trials. We don't know what the results are going to be. And to some degree, we don't even know what the risk is when you sign up
Mhm.
for this.
Mhm.
But we
Amen.
can have someone explain what they've seen in models, which, we have shared yesterday the recording from the one company, Alage Bio, that gave a talk. And then we also shared yesterday the gene therapy panel, like I mentioned earlier. There's a lot of
Mhm.
discussion around what does it mean? What will it potentially look like? And risk benefit weighing, right, for your decision
Mhm.
making.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing so openly. And I want to make sure we allow some time for people to ask questions. You can
Good.
raise your hand and I can unmute you, I think.
Mhm.
You can also type your question into the Q&A. So if any of you that are on listening and you want to ask Nate a question, then please let us know. I am trying to look and see if any have come in. Um, yes, and I've just confirmed I can, if someone raises their hand, I can easily unmute them and allow them to talk. We've got quite a few listening. I know you all have to have some questions. I have more if no one else has any to ask.
You can
Uh,
ask me anything you want.
yeah, he's not shy. He's really willing to share. Okay, let's see here. Okay, so we have a question. What is the difference between gene therapy and exon skipping?
Um, so I believe, and before Andrew's diagnosis, I hated hospitals. I would get sick to my stomach if I even went to like my grandma's nursing home. I just really had a weak stomach for medicine and healthcare facilities. But after he got diagnosed, I was like, no, 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 we got to change that. We got to push through. So I'm not a scientist by any stretch of the imagination. I believe that exon skipping does not get to the gene level that gene therapy does. We should ask ChatGPT. Gene therapy is one treatment, trillions and trillions of um, virus vectors. So I like to use freight or trucking analogies because that's what I do every day. And a virus vector is like a pallet that you load stuff onto. So the virus vector is like the delivery mechanism that the gene therapy is loaded onto. So when Andrew was dosed, it was like a 75 or 80-minute IV procedure, and trillions of virus vectors were loaded with Elevidys. And it's not gene editing, it's gene therapy. And I believe that exon skipping isn't quite as grand, or does it, nor does it produce the benefit that gene therapy does. Um,
Yeah, and I can take some of these questions that maybe
Yeah,
you and I
you're
can't
way smarter than
answer,
me,
and
Karen. You're way smarter.
we'll find someone else to help clarify that. I will say that exon skipping, my sometimes I know it's like an amino acid gets inserted that encourages that to skip over the next exon, so it's a little different than replacing the gene, and
Yes.
those just those types of therapies are decided based on how it would work for a particular mutation. Um, then we have another question here. Let's see, I've got two in the chat that says, do they continue with blood testing through the follow-up, or what was the process on follow-up and monitoring progress? And I'm just gonna pipe in and say that, keep in mind this is gene therapy for a different disorder, so it may not be the same, but I do think it is helpful to understand what the protocols were for your family situation.
Yeah, Andrew has been to Columbus probably, let's see, 12, 28. He's probably been to Columbus 40 times in his life. And there's a definite cadence in a clinical trial. So, they're concerned about safety and patient health. So initially after dosing, whether it's week 1 or week 49, you're there on site, or we were, and he had to have muscle biopsies prior to week 1 and prior to week 49, to get the actual fiber of his muscle under a microscope so that they compare it. But blood tests, definitely. He has had echocardiograms and EKGs multiple times. Your heart's a muscle, so they want to see how the gene therapy is hopefully benefiting muscle tissue. He also has to do, they call it physical therapy, but it's really like PE class physical fitness testing. So like the standard, oh, what is it called? The North Star Ambulation Assessment. It's like 10 or 15 different exercises, and they want to compare prior to treatment, compare to placebo, so on and so forth. So they monitor all that very scientifically, very rigorously. We're not allowed as parents to go back to the physical therapy, because we'd probably get them to produce maybe more by bribing them, or being a dad and
Right,
saying, "Hey, let's
right,
go! Come on, Andrew, hustle, hustle!"
right.
Playing some like AC/DC or something so that he gets motivated. Um, But yeah, Sarepta now, he is 7 years post-dosing, almost 7 years post-dosing. And I think they're going to keep track of Andrew and his disease progression forever. I mean,
Yeah,
we've given them our,
as long as you'll keep going, right? Because
yeah,
that's how they're going to get the long-term information.
exactly.
Yeah. So we have another question that says, you said you worked for your own business. What about your wife? I think some of us may hesitate because of our jobs and potentially missing a big chunk of time of work, which we couldn't afford.
Yeah, yeah, that's hard. Um, you know, there are days where Jack, my father-in-law, and I want to strangle each other. And it's awkward when we get together for like family birthdays or holidays, because we're both pretty intense guys in our own way. But he is Andrew's grandpa, and he was very generous and gracious to allow me to take the time off I needed to make this a reality. And we're really fortunate and super, super thankful that he was open to that, because it is hard. My wife, she should actually be the president of Monroe Transportation. She runs circles around me and Jack. But she's also a part-time librarian at the local village library. So she can kind of pick and choose when she wants to work. But it does require sacrifice to participate in trials, and you miss family activities or things you thought you're going to do or wanted to do, or you know, when Andrew was going through all that in 2019 and 2020, my output or my productivity professionally was a little compromised. And that is a risk that you have to take. Um, but I think in the grand scheme of things, we wouldn't do anything differently if we were afforded a second opportunity to go back and change anything. Um, yeah, we're also really thankful for our church community and our kids' parochial school community, very supportive. But it's risky, you know. It's like I'm sure there are certain dads who have kids in my kids' class that are like, "Oh, it's Plasman. I don't feel like hearing about his drama or all the crap they have to do." So they probably avoid me like a plague. But then there are other parents where every time I see him at a band concert or a choir concert or kid sporting event or whatever it is, they're like, "How's Andrew doing? How are you guys doing? Are you holding up?" So, I mean, pros and cons. You're not going to please everyone, and you're not going to be friends with everyone. But hopefully, if you're really forthcoming and transparent, and your employer has a heart and they care about people, and you explain your situation, they'll hopefully show some grace and human decency and allow you to participate and do what you need to do.
Right. We have another question that asked how the therapy was administered. Um, So like how was the AAV vector administered for the Duchenne treatment? Does it go into, is it intrathecally? Is it which would mean in the spinal column, right? Or
It was
was
an
it given
IV.
muscular, right? IV.
Yeah,
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 because DMD is the dystrophin that it needs to get to the cells in the muscles, right? So
it
that's a
does.
difference between our diagnoses because with our loved ones, it's going to have to get to the brain, right?
Mm.
So there's the whole blood-brain barrier um, and the need to probably administer in a way that it reaches the brain more easily.
So I did find a picture of Andrew. Um,
There you go.
okay, so that was week
Aw,
49,
all
and
right.
he'd already received, you know, the real thing. So it was a much more casual environment. In fact, Dr. Mendel let the nurse practitioner hit the start button, and he was actually 5 minutes late. So it was pretty evident to us that Andrew had received the real thing at week 1 and not week 49. But it was an intense process. I mean, the anticipation and the waiting and all the professionals being in the patient room with us, it was a lot. And yeah, it was simple though too. I mean, it was just a 75-minute IV. I mean, they showed up with like a Ziploc bag. It's like, holy cow, this just looks like contact solution, you know? But it was the magic or the thing that we had been hoping and praying for.
So what would you say was the most challenging part of this journey emotionally?
Initially, it was I would call it the shock and horror of, oh my word, I expected my life with my wife and my three kids to go a certain direction, and recalibrating that took some time. And we definitely had a 3-year honeymoon, 3 to 4 year honeymoon, where we didn't really see any disease progression in Andrew. And then in 24 and 25, we've definitely observed, yeah, some more pronounced struggle that he's experiencing. Um, I still have days where, like, if I'm driving home from work and I, I see a group of like his contemporaries riding their bikes or playing 3-on-3 basketball, I get pretty sad about that because it was such an important like experienced in my adolescent years. And I always thought that that would be my son's adolescent experience. But see, that the problem with that, Karen, or my shortcoming is it's Nate's freaking ego and Nate's agenda and Nate wanting what he wants. Andrew doesn't know any differently. So I just got to shut my mouth and suck it up and realize that his life is not going to be the same as what my life was, but he doesn't know any differently. So that's kind of a challenge that's ongoing. I don't think you ever fully overcome that or conquer that. I mean, it's day by day, moment by moment. But Andrew's got a battery powered three-wheel bike that he just whips around our neighborhood on. So he does have some independence. It's just a different
Yeah.
independence or experience than what I expected it to be.
Right, which a lot of our community doesn't have at all, right? I
Ah,
mean, it's very different, but I can relate to seeing kids the same age and what they're
yeah.
doing, and that it's hard. And I don't think it matters the level of difference as a
Mhm.
parent, what we
Mhm.
want for our child. If that's not happening for them, it's still painful. It's not any less painful for you
Mhm.
because yours is a different level than it is
Yeah.
painful for me at whatever level my child's challenges are, right?
Yeah.
So we're
Yep.
almost out of time, but I do want to ask one more question.
Please.
Many of our families are excited about the promise of gene therapy, but they're also really overwhelmed because there's so many unknowns, right? So for those families, what would you like them to know?
It is overwhelming. There's a lot of uncertainty. When you have the opportunity to connect with clinicians or pharma folks, ask a lot of questions. They're bright, capable, competent people, and there's no such thing as a dumb question or a bad question. Like if you want an answer about something, you can ask whatever question you want. So be confident, be assertive, try not to be too aggressive because I think maybe you can err on being annoying or like high maintenance. But yeah, if you want to know something, you can always ask AI. You know, I was real skeptical of AI and all this stuff. I'm kind of a recovering paper addict and I'm old school, but I mean, here, exon skipping and gene therapy are both treatments for genetic disorders. Exon skipping uses molecular patches to mask RNA errors, requiring frequent dosing, whereas gene therapy delivers a functional miniature gene using a viral vector for a long-term effect.
Yeah, and it's a one-time dose typically, right?
It's 5 seconds. I mean, that's all it took.
Yeah.
So ask questions. Don't ever feel like the clinician or the team doesn't want your questions. And if they do, then I would be a little leery and skeptical because the bottom line is you're entrusting your child to them, and they have a
Right.
tremendous responsibility. And it's your child that you've been
Well,
entrusted with.
yeah, and
Ask all the questions you want.
you have a right to have informed consent, right? Informed
Amen.
consent means you're informed. You feel empowered
Yes.
to make the appropriate decision. So I'm going to do one more all call for questions. You can put them in the chat or in the Q&A. And if we don't get any more in the next minute, then we will wrap it up and call it a day. Again, Nate, I can't thank you enough for coming and sharing this story. And would it be okay if we also said if people listen later and they have questions, they can
Yeah.
email them to us and we'll get with you and see if we can find answers?
Please feel free to share my email address,
Okay.
Nate at Monroe-trans.com. And you can even put like my cell phone number. Um, that's
Well,
fine
it'll be
too.
on YouTube, so
That's
we'll
okay.
just
It's
maybe we'll
okay.
stick
I
with
mean,
the we'll stick with the email. They can email
okay,
you with your
fine,
cell phone
fine.
number.
All right. I hate email. I much prefer a text message.
Oh,
I said that somewhat
okay. Well,
selfishly.
okay. Well, we'll talk about that and we'll
Okay.
put what you
Yeah.
really want there.
Yeah.
Um, Let's see. I don't see any new questions. So I want to thank all of the attendees for being on. And if you think of something, Nate said his email if you think of something, but you can also email IFCR at cdkl5.com and we
Yeah.
will move those questions. Oh, wait, there's one more. Let's see. I just saw
Okay.
one. Oh, will the recording be posted? Yes, I am committed to posting that very quickly. It should turn around, just has to be processed and then we can share it out. So it will
Can I
be
offer one quick
sure.
disclaimer? Um, so I'm generally a pretty optimistic guy. Try to be positive, look at the world as a glass being half full rather than half empty. But please know that it's not all sunshine and rainbows. And there are a lot of really hard freaking days where I bang my desk and I swear and I yell and I'm frustrated and angry. But I always know that Jesus is Lord of everything we're going to face today, tomorrow, and every day going forward, forever and ever. Amen. And I'm not the author of life. I'm merely a sinful, fallen human being. But yeah, there are really hard days. So hopefully I didn't glaze over things too much. But I think it's important to always note or highlight that, yeah, it's not all sunshine and rainbows. So
So I appreciate that, Nate. I'm going to ask a follow-up question if you don't mind staying a couple more minutes.
that's
So
fine.
when you say that, is there anything about the gene therapy process that you would say that was hard? Like if you broke it down to whether it was I'm assuming you had to isolate more when the immunosuppression was elevated, right? I know kids with
Yeah.
Duchenne take steroids a lot of the time, like you mentioned, but there was
Yeah.
a time when it was more isolating, I'm sure, than typical for your
Yep.
family, or whatever that would be. Like if there are some things you could talk a little bit about that were the hard
Yeah.
of the
Yeah.
gene therapy process.
Sure. Um, so a couple things. The suppression piece or the isolation piece, because Sarah and Andrew were away from home and we were really, really confident that he received it at week 1, it's not like we totally ignored the protocol from week 49 on, but it was so evident that he was such a different little guy that it gave us confidence to, and maybe I shouldn't even be acknowledging this or disclosing it, but I'll be honest. I mean, it was like, holy cow, there's no way he didn't get gene therapy because he's doing all these things he could never do before. So once we came to that conclusion, we took the protocol a little less seriously. Maybe shame on us for not being as loyal or as faithful rule followers, but I mean, it was like so obvious. The other thing I will say is that, yeah, I really advocated my brains out on Sarepta's behalf. And I did that out of gratitude and out of wanting more families around the world to have the really unique opportunity that our family was blessed with. So I participated in 3 congressional briefings. I testified in front of the FDA. I wrote some op-eds for the Wall Street Journal, the Chicago Tribune, so on and so forth. And I did that joyfully out of a response to this amazing thing that our family was fortunate to receive. And then in 2014, we found out that Andrew had only received 44% of the intended dose. You know, they were trying to figure out all the calculus back in 2018 and 2019, and they miscalculated the appropriate amount of actual drug that he was to receive because there was some confusion about the titering methodology between what the FDA wanted, what Sarepta thought was ideal, and what Nationwide Children's Hospital was doing. So when we got that news, summer of 2024, that was a really tough pill to swallow because I kind of felt like an idiot. Um, And I felt embarrassed, like, oh my goodness, I put all this time and energy and effort into being a champion for this. And I still am a champion because they didn't do it on purpose. I mean, it happened. And, but it was kind of a dark 3 to 6 months of like, man, what if he had gotten 100% of the intended dose instead of 44? So then the primary or the principal investigator, Dr. Ann Conley, she took over for Dr. Mendel. She's a wonderful woman, wonderful woman. She said, Nathan, stop it. 44% is better than 0%. It's all about the context and about the relative perspective and the lenses you're looking through. She said, Andrew's a responder. There are boys in this trial that are patients of mine that got 100% that are not doing as well as Andrew. There are boys that got 22% that are doing great. Your son got 44%. He's a responder. Focus on the fact that he got 44% and not 0. It's like, wow, from her mouth to my ear, that's God's truth right there.
Right. Right. And it has to be hard, but that's goes back to what you were saying earlier about this is a clinical trial and they're learning as they go. And I'm sure now they're much better at calculating and figuring that dosing than they were when it all first started, right?
Yes, for sure.
And and I think there's a little bit of a parallel in the potential clinical trials in our space. There's a
Mhm,
possibility, or even possibly in some of the Duchenne studies, when you're doing a phase 2 and you're looking at safety over
mhm,
efficacy, right? Sometimes you're determining dose, and there may be more than one dose level
mhm,
given in these
mhm.
trials, right? And
Yep.
I've heard parents say, oh, if I knew I was going to get the largest dose, I would do it. And oh no. Oh, sorry. Are you still there? My computer did something
Yeah.
weird and I thought it shut off, but it did not. Okay.
All
So
good, Karen. All good.
families will say that, and the reality is we don't know which level is going to be best, right? We don't know if the
Yeah.
lower dose level or the higher dose level is going to be the ideal. And I think it just goes back to being willing to participate, being committed to the process, and understanding that the goal of a clinical trial is to determine safety and measure some efficacy and then move on and learn from there. But that was that I'm certain that was hard to hear and then to have to kind of process and deal with.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's okay to have feelings of disappointment or
Of course.
some sorrow. I mean, it's real. I think back to like the early days of Duchenne clinical trials, going back like 15, 20 years. It was before right to try was legislated, and there would be families that it was a double-blind, placebo-controlled trial, and they weren't guaranteed to get any treatment ever.
Right.
They could invest like 30 trips to Hartford, Connecticut out of their own pocket,
Right.
and their son wouldn't even get the real thing. So, I mean, yeah, another conclusion I've come to is in the universe, you're going to meet people and see people and know people that have it way better than you on paper. You're also going to meet people that when you take a step back and you evaluate, you're like, whoa, that is a hard life that they are leading. And I'm so fortunate that I don't have to navigate some of the waters that they do. But I mean, we all have our shortcomings and our
That's right.
crosses to carry or our yokes to bear. So just finding contentment and joy today, which my talking doctors drilled into my head, therapist, is the
Yeah, I
important part.
agree.
A
I
lot of
agree with that.
therapy, not as much as my wife thinks I need, but I still think the importance of talking to an independent third party is pretty valuable. I call it the landfill. I can just go there and dump, and
Yep,
there's something really life-giving about that
I agree.
process. Yeah.
I agree with
Not
that
not
as
to
well.
stand on a soapbox or preach or anything, but
Right.
yeah.
Well, thank you again for your time, for your openness, and those of you
Yeah,
still
you're welcome.
listening, please, if you think of another question, like I said, you can IFCR@cdkl5.com, send your questions. We'll get them to Nate and we'll get you some answers. Thank you again, Nate. Appreciate you
You're
very
welcome.
much. And
My
I hope all
pleasure.
keeps going well.
It was fun. Yeah,
It
really
was.
enjoyed it,
Thank
Karen.
you.
You bet. All right, you're welcome. Take care.